In this video, I'm going to show you how to create and use lambda functions. Lambda functions are small anonymous functions that can have any number of arguments but can only have one expression. They are defined using the lambda keyword and are often used for short and simple functions that don't require a separate def statement. The syntax for a lambda function is right here. It is the keyword lambda and then any arguments that you would like to operate on, a colon, and then after the colon, the expression, how you would operate on these arguments. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this and put in a very basic lambda expression. In this example, we define a lambda function called square that takes one argument x and it returns the square of x by raising it to the second power. We call the lambda function just like any other function, passing an argument, in this case 5, and we get the result 25. So if I run this, we get the output down here of 25. And this lambda function is the equivalent of me typing def square, putting x in my parameters list, and then under here doing return x to the power of 2. But the lambda function is more concise as I've been able to put it on a single line rather than having to put it on 2 lines. But let's look at a somewhat more interesting example. So I have this here where I have created a numbers list 1 through 5. And then I am creating squared underscore numbers equals, and then I have list, and then in parentheses I have map, and then in those parentheses I have a lambda function. And the way the map function works is it makes an iterator that computes the function using the arguments from each of the iterables. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to go through each element in the numbers list and pass that element into this lambda function, and then it is going to put that result in a new list called squared numbers. And if I run this, we'll get the output 1, 4, 9, 16, and 25, which are the squares of the numbers list here. We could also use lambda functions to filter elements from a list. So I have a new numbers list here that is 1 through 6. Then I am creating even numbers, which is a list that contains the filter function. And in the filter function, I am passing it this lambda function here, which is going to check to see if x mod 2 is equal to 0, and it's going to do this for each element in the list numbers. If I hover over the filter function here, it says it returns an iterator yielding those items of iterable for which function item is true. And what that means is that it wants a function that is going to return a value that it can determine if it is a true or false value. This does not necessarily have to be a Boolean value of true or false. It could be any object as long as it is truthy. And if I run this now, we'll get the output 2, 4, 6. We can also use lambda functions to help us with sorting. So here I have a student list that contains 3 tuples, one for Alice, Bob, and Eve. And in these tuples is their name and age. And I want to sort this list by the ages that are in the tuples. So to do this, I will call the sort method on the students list. And the way the sort method works is it takes a key argument, which is a function, in this case, a lambda function I am creating on the fly. And whatever value that function returns is the value that is used to sort the elements. Since I want to sort the elements by the student's age, the lambda function will take in a tuple from the list and return the value that's at index 1 of that tuple, which happens to be the student's age. And if I run this, we'll see that I get Bob 20, Eve 22, and Alice 25. We can even pass lambda functions in as arguments to other functions. So here I have defined a function apply operation that takes 3 arguments, x, y, and a optional argument operation, which defaults to a lambda function. And this lambda function takes 2 arguments and adds them together. And the return from the apply operations function is going to return the value that is returned from the lambda function. So here we are calling the lambda function and passing in the values that we have for x and y. And then we have multiply equals, and we're creating a new lambda function. And this time it takes 2 arguments, a and b, but it multiplies them together. And then I have add equals apply operation, and I only pass it in 5 and 3, which is going to make the operation argument default to this lambda function here. And then I have multi equals apply operation, and I've passed it in a 7 and 8, and this time I have passed it in my multiply lambda function that I created up here. So it is going to multiply these 2 numbers together. And when I run this, we'll see that I get the output 8 because 5 plus 3, which is happening in this lambda function here, is 8, and then 8 times 7 is 56, which is what I get when I pass the multiply lambda function into the operation argument. So the operation is calling this lambda function here and multiplying the values passed in for x and y. So as you can see, lambda functions are a handy tool for writing concise and functional style code in Python. They are particularly useful when you need to define a simple function on the fly without creating a separate function using the def keyword. However, for more complex logic than larger functions, it is generally better to use regular functions for better readability and maintainability.